Every session is 90 minutes. It gives people almost an hour to present or share whatever their topic or expertise is. And then the third half can be used for Q&A. I typically recommend they do have slides. I actually check in with everybody a couple days before it starts, and I ask them like, hey, are you good to go? Something that I see Daniel do that I really like is that he'll often ask the first question, or he'll be the person who like interrupts and is curious about what the speaker is speaking about. And I think that actually encourages other people in the community to do the same, because again, people are shy. This is true for most of the communities that I've worked with, is that the meeting starts within a minute. So there is not a long lag time. And I think that's important. A chill host is a bad host. Priya Parker says, which is really funny, she's like, if you're a chill host, then what ends up happening, and you'll see this happen in sometimes like in classes or Zoom calls, where the most like loud or aggressive person will like take over. Because otherwise what happens, you end up having all of these channels and it's spread thin and people don't really know where to go for things, or like one people will comment, but nobody will ever respond. It depends on what your goals are as a creator. It's nice because you have direct access to the people who are engaging with your work, but it's another project you're taking on. So I do think it's something to not take lightly.
Welcome to Beginner Maps. We are recording season 2 now, and this time we're bringing to you founders and operators of top membership community businesses, dissecting their strategy so that you can build your community business. Today, I'm thrilled to have Michelle Varghese with us. Michelle is the first and the only community hire for Small Bets, the most popular private community of independent entrepreneurs with more than 5,000 paying members. And that's not all. She has also helped in building other communities like Rite of Passage by David Perel and The Pathless Path by Paul Miller. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Nitesh. I'm so excited to be here.
It's a pleasure having you here. Michelle, let's talk about that milestone, reaching 5,000 members on Discord. This is a really interesting milestone because it's not just like any 5,000 members, it's 5,000 members who are paying for being in this Discord. So my question to you, like, can you speak about why the Small Bets model works?
Yes, I can. So Small Bets, for anybody who doesn't know, is a community built by Daniel Vassallo with the focus on people who want to be entrepreneurs and want to launch products or courses or launch something monetized. But the theory behind it is that instead of doing a big project where you're investing a lot of resources and time and money before you even know if it's going to pay off, the theory is that with Small Bets, you can put together a project like over a weekend. You don't have to put a ton of time, money, and resources into it, because the belief is that sometimes a lot of the whole concept of success is a little bit random. So it's a way to try things, try them quickly, make sure you make an investment that's something that you can handle, and the community supports people who are working on those type of projects. So we have guest classes, we have an active Discord where people can get feedback, they can ask questions, they can share small wins. So that's the general gist of Small Bets overall. The community itself is very lively. Like you said, there's 5,000 people now, which is absolutely crazy. And it's funny because I think with the ideas behind Small Bets, even Daniel will probably say, who knows why it worked out? You try a couple things, you see what works. But I think some of the things that people really enjoy is that, one, you do have these classes. You can take a class from Daniel where he explains the concept of Small Bets. You can take classes on Medium, Substack, LinkedIn, SEO, all of these different topics, and you only pay a one-time fee. So you go to Small Bets, you pay a lifetime fee, and you basically have all of these courses forever. So I think that's like pretty unique to Small Bets. And on top of that, the Discord is really active. People love to chime in, share their wins. It's a really great supportive community.
That's so crazy. And I love that. So whenever somebody typically thinks of paid membership communities, we think of recurring fees, like maybe an annual fee or a monthly fee. But by making this a one-time fee, and it's like not even 2 months, it's like $200 to $300 depending upon where you are in the world. It's made it really accessible for people to make the decision of joining the community?
I was in this community, one of the first communities I joined, and they were charging me, I think it was like $30 a month. And I ended up realizing it wasn't for me. I didn't turn it off right away. I still, I was in that in-between stage where I was like, maybe I'll make these products, maybe I won't. And then what ended up happening was that I felt pretty resentful after a while because I was like, man, I'm paying $30 a month. I really have to make a decision about whether or not I'm going to stay in this community. And maybe that's a trade-off. Maybe it encourages people to participate more or get out. But I know for me, there was a certain point where I felt like I wasted money because I was still in the community, but I wasn't doing the thing that I wanted to do. And that happens to a lot of people. A lot of people, we don't get started as quickly as we want. So I think one of the benefits of a lifetime membership that I've personally found is that I buy it with small bets. A lot of people, they purchase it, but they maybe don't have the time to invest right away, but they'll come back in 2 or 3 months, or they'll have a project that they want feedback on. And they always have the opportunity to come back, or they can spend a couple months just watching guest classes. They can spend a couple months following the Discord. I think it feels a little bit more comfortable because you're like, wow, I paid once and I have access to this forever. I don't have to worry about making the decision every single month about whether or not I want to stay in.
Right. That's really important. And I can really understand why it works on the consumers end. They are getting a lot of stuff for like a membership fee. So it's like a really active Discord, which is buzzing all the time. And on top of it, they're organizing guest classes, which we'll talk about more in a minute, and doing like a bunch of other different things to give value for the members. And it's all supported by, correct me if I'm wrong, a team of three, right? You and the two co-founders.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something to keep in mind if you're listening to this and you're thinking of starting a community, it's hard to start a community right away and have it be super active. So I would not be discouraged if you're in that situation. Things that I think that worked really well for small bets in the beginning and that I would recommend to anybody starting a community is just being really active too as the founder. I've spoken to people who want to start a community and they are like, well, but I hate being on Facebook or Discord or in these communities. I'm like, yeah, maybe you should start a community. Because what happens, like a lot of people just need a little bit of encouragement. Like they're willing to contribute, but they feel shy to do so. So I think for anybody starting a community, it's just good to keep in mind, like if you can be a little bit active in the front, I wasn't working for Daniel when he started. And so I think that's something that's like important to him. Like he wants people to feel like, if they share a small win, someone's going to say, hey, congrats, or like drop like a, fire emoji. And
Right.
it goes a long way. It's little things that go a long way.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And do you remember at what point did you join Small Bets as, in the capacity of helping Daniel full time, or actually officially helping him?
Yeah, so that was probably a year ago. It was like January 2022
How many
or
members did
2023.
the community have?
That's a good question. I don't know. To me, it feels like half, but maybe like 2,500, 3,000. So it's pretty, I mean, I think it'd been running for at least, it's funny because I think of it in cohorts. So I know they had done like 20 cohorts by the time I joined.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was a little bit of time, maybe a year, 2 years.
That's it's a lot of members to be supporting, like with just a team of two. And then now that you're here, you're supporting even more members and you're running events for them. So let's talk about the events for a little bit. Good books, these amazing guests. So I was just looking at the guest lineup for the month of February, I think March also, and it's so crazy. Like you've got the big names and the who's who of this industry of our sphere. There's Arvind Kal, there's Janice Ozelins, there's Steph Smith, along with the other guests who are expert in their own niches, like talking about Midjourney or talking about SEO and creating courses on Udemy and like every possible way that people can make money online. You essentially have a guest speaking for it. Like it sounds like I'm marketing and trying to sell the community, but it's just crazy to me that you're able to do that for so many events. So talk to me a little bit about the guest booking and like the backside of managing this amazing events calendar.
Yeah. So for small bets, Daniel and Louis compensate anybody who teaches their classes, from what I understand. And I think that creates a really great dynamic because people really come in and want to do a good job, really want to speak to their expertise and feel really valued, I imagine, after going through that.
Yeah, I think that's they must feel valued because I've been in a lot of communities and I've managed a lot of communities myself. And more often than not, we would try to find what happens is that we try to find people for speaking on to the community, to events and workshops, and we're trying to. It'll be a struggle to find members. And what ended up happening, and this wasn't the case for all the events, but it usually tended towards people who had something to sell. So, if you can't
Mm.
pay them like with money, you have to pay them somehow. And, you're going to attract people who want to sell something to your audience. And that's a fair trade. But I feel like it also limits the kind of workshops or classes that you can run for your community.
Yeah, I think that's something to consider if you want to bring in speakers. In a lot of ways, it's really great to be able to give them something in return. So, in the case of small bets, because the community is growing, I think Daniel is happy to pay people and have experts come. And a lot of these people he knows. So I think that he's also trying to support people in their own journey, which I think is so awesome too, because a lot of these people, that's maybe the first time that they're testing out a guest class, even though they've had success in their field. It's an opportunity for them to think about, oh, if this class goes well, maybe I can turn this into a product. Maybe this is a course I could teach myself. So he's not only giving people the opportunity to make a little bit of money doing it, but I think people really appreciate also having the ability to test drive their ideas and test drive, do people actually resonate with this? What are the questions that people ask? And I think to your point, that maybe not all communities have the means to pay people, but at the same time, like if you give them the opportunity to be able to test a class, have the opportunity to have access to your audience, it's a bunch of people that they could possibly sell something to.
That makes a lot of sense. And I want to double click on this experience of running these classes because you're the expert here. And I want this segment to be like a mini masterclass in hosting, booking guests and just running amazing workshops. So I'm gonna pepper you with some questions here about the experience of running these workshops, and
Yeah.
you tell me from your experience at Small Bets how you did that. So, like, easy question: how long is a session, a typical session for the guest?
Yes. Every session is 90 minutes. A question I get always from the guest is how long should it be? Should I have a Q&A session? I like the 90 minutes format because it gives people almost an hour to present or share what they're learning or share whatever their topic or expertise is, whether it's YouTube or LinkedIn or small businesses. And then the third half can be used for Q&A. So a lot of people join live and they do like to ask questions. I mean, you're having an opportunity to sit with people who have audiences of maybe, in the tens or hundreds of thousands of followers. And now they're in this intimate space with you. And so I think something I appreciate is that I can join a meeting with even Daniel Vasallo and be able to say, hey, like you're talking about building a community in this guest class. I want to know a little bit more about why you chose to do a lifetime membership. And that's such a rare opportunity. And so it's really nice that people have that like a third of the segment to ask questions.
Yeah, that's really cool. So has it, but 60 minutes for just the monologue and the lecture, basically, it feels a little long. Has any guest ever told you that I don't know if I can speak for 60 minutes?
That's a good question. I don't know if anyone has been too hesitant.
Okay.
It's funny because I'm not sure what they expect going in, but typically when they do the course, like Daniel or Louie will also manage the chat. So on Zoom, obviously there's chat, you can ask questions. So they'll
Mm-hmm.
ask questions during people might ask questions in the chat, and then the speaker a lot of times will answer it in the middle of the presentation. So typically they go a little bit longer. Usually,
Mm-hmm.
like we get to that 90-minute spot like easily.
Okay.
So if anybody ever is worried about it, I'm never too concerned. It's rare that
Okay.
people don't have questions. Again, like the people who are teaching the class is so well matched with, entrepreneurs, people who want to do these small bets, people who are interested in this. And so, yeah, typically there's no problem. It feels like a lot of time, but I think what happens, they probably have a presentation that's maybe like 40, 45 minutes, but like questions will kind of, push it into the 60-minute mark or even longer. And so it does end up being a conversation. I think the nice thing about having like slides, or the nice thing about having a little bit more of a formal presentation, is it gives people something to respond to. So we do encourage people to ask questions during the class. People do ask questions, which is really awesome. So it's not like, someone's just sitting there with a slide and, you're like in a college lecture where they're like, and then this is how I started my first Medium page. And then this is how I did this. A lot of times it's really interactive. So it ends up going longer than you'd expect.
So like people are asking questions even during the first 60 minutes. It's not like strictly like 60-minute monologue followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. It's all mixed together.
Yeah, exactly. We ask them permission to interrupt for, questions in the chat. I think almost everybody says yes. And it's nice to have someone else manage the chat because it's hard to, share your screen and talk at the same time. But it's not like I wouldn't say, there's not 60 slides in a 60-minute presentation. It's usually, a little bit of their background so people know what they work on, a little bit of what worked for them, and like some tips. But there's like different methods. Some people like to come in, some people will do breakout rooms. I know that in some communities, breakout rooms are really popular. That's where you take a Zoom room and you put, say, 3 people in a room for 12 minutes and have them discuss a question or work on a drawing or an idea. And that can work out really well. Sometimes if people are a little shy or they don't have to, they might hop off. So that's like just a trade-off that you have to make.
That's nice. So you do 90 minutes like in total, which has speaker presenting with their slides, and there's somebody moderating the conversation who interrupts them while they're presenting and asks permission to share the question that is being asked in the chat. Am I correct?
Yeah, exactly. Like Daniel, for example, will find a moment where he's like, oh, this came up in the chat. Maybe you're going to cover this, but they were wondering what kind of camera do you use for your YouTube channel?
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, about the slides, what guidelines do you share with the guests for preparing a good set of slides?
I typically recommend they do have slides. So that's the first thing. That's a preference. I think also get to know your community. Some people don't have that preference. Like there are certain communities where they just want you to come in and talk. And maybe if there's only like 5 people, it's nice to have everybody on camera. But with the small bets community, I think people like to have something to look at least for part of it. I think part of it too is because it is an international community. So sometimes it's nice to be able to, like if English isn't your first language or even the speaker's first language, like sometimes it's nice to be able to like look at the screen and say, okay, this is what this person is talking about. And I have something I can follow along with. So that's why I typically suggest slides. Outside of that, I let them do whatever works best for them. We haven't really had any issues with people doing too much or too little. Sometimes the meetings will go long if people have a lot of questions and, people can just hop off if they want to, but typically I don't give too much details outside of that. I would say if somebody asked, my recommendation would be do a little bit of an intro, a couple slides on who you are, something personal, and also something like what gives you credibility, like why, did we invite you here to speak? And then maybe talk a little bit about how you yourself found success, what you did, and then like practical tips. So in a community like Small Bets specifically, these are people who are entrepreneurs. These are people who want to emulate what you're doing. And so the goal is to be able to come from this and like take away practical tips. So it's less of like, it's nice to have stories and stuff, obviously, that keeps it engaged, that keeps it interesting, but people want to put these things into practice too.
It sounds like almost every guest that you have has experience speaking, or at least like they have the content prepared due to posting a lot on Twitter, and they know what works and what clicks with the audience.
It's a mix. A lot of people do. I think a lot of times if you have success doing something, someone probably has invited you to speak on it before, especially if you're an online entrepreneur like a lot of us are. At the same time, there have been people who have asked, like, do you mind joining early so that I can test out the slides? Do you mind giving me a little bit of feedback on what I'm sharing? And so I actually check in with everybody a couple days before it starts. And I ask them like, hey, are you good to go? And there are some people where if it is their first time, they'll have a lot more questions for me. And so I'm always
Hmm.
happy to guide them. And I think that's actually something important. Like if you do have somebody who's coming to speak to your community, even if they are a person who's comfortable speaking in front of groups, they may not know what the culture of your group is. Again, like slides are something that people in small bets, I personally find that they like. And so if somebody is telling me, hey, like I'm curious to know like what works, I can let them know like, it's nice if you have slides, at least something for people to respond to. People will ask questions. In small bets, people might not have their camera open. That's like good to know. There are other communities where they'll come in and they'll say, hey, we want everybody to turn their cameras on. We want it to be an experience where you can see everybody. And so having that information helps your speaker also shape their content specifically for your community, because every community is different.
Hmm. Right. And what advice will you give to the listeners who are planning a speaker-led event to make that event memorable for the community members?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say first and foremost, it's good to do as much marketing within your community for the speaker. We have a list, we have a channel specifically for our calendar. People always have the opportunity to go and find those events. They, for me, it's not a requirement, but if someone, let's say, for example, someone has a question about LinkedIn in our audience building channel, if I know that Justin Walsh is coming to speak this month, I'll highlight it. I'll say, hey, you have a question about LinkedIn. Justin Walsh is going to come in next month. You might want to put this on your calendar. And so, and we do 24 hours reminder before, 1 hour reminder before the event. So that way people know. And I think that's setting both your speaker up for success because they have the opportunity to have as many interested people there as possible. And also setting it up for success for your community members because they're not necessarily going to, you're not the most important thing in their life. They don't necessarily know every event on the calendar. So I think that's like a small thing that just makes the experience a lot better because, obviously the more people that are in it, the more people that are engaged, that really helps. A couple other things, I think something that I see Daniel do that I really like is that he'll often ask the first question, or he'll be the person who like interrupts and is curious about what the speaker is speaking about. And I think that actually encourages other people in the community to do the same. Because again, people are shy. People might not want to interrupt. They might think their questions are stupid. They might think their questions are too
Hmm.
basic. And I think whatever you can do to encourage that, even just dropping a hello in the chat when people come in, those little things make it so people feel comfortable like saying and speaking to the speaker and asking questions.
Right. I'm curious when you were speaking about, the culture part of running this event. Do you have any specific culture for the first 5 minutes of starting like, let's say you open the Zoom rooms for everybody to come in. What happens in the first 5 minutes?
Yeah. So with small bets specifically, and actually this is also true for Rite of Passage, this is true for most of the communities that I've worked with, is that the meeting starts within a minute. So there is not a long lag time. And I think that's important because it teaches people that if you come late, you're going to miss something. And it also is like respectful to the speaker's time. Like they have probably, a decent amount of work a decent amount of slides or information they want to share. So you don't want people just like sitting around. And so I've seen this happen two ways. In small bets, a lot of times Daniel will just say, hey, like we're going to give people a couple of seconds to, find their Zoom seats, make sure they didn't get caught up because of the upgrade. While they're doing that, he'll maybe chat with the speaker for a second and then also like share the screen with them. They'll like kind of, get everything set up. And then right around a minute and a half mark, things will get started. Again, I think that's important because you don't really want people sitting there in your Zoom for 5 minutes, like wondering what's going to happen. That actually happened to me recently.
Mhm.
I joined a conference or like an online like free event and I saw that the invite, like a link popped up. And so I joined there was maybe 10 people there, cameras off. And I was like, what is going on? Nobody was saying anything. And it turned out that they had actually opened the room like 15 minutes early, but I at least didn't see any messaging about that's how that worked. And one, I almost left because I was like, what's going on? This is so awkward. Two, it discouraged me from turning my camera on because nobody had their camera on and nobody like welcomed me when I came in. Nobody like said, hey, we're so excited to see you guys. No one explained what was going on. And I think like a good host and a good co-host will make sure there's like a good format and a good, hello, say hi to people, let people know what's going on, let people know like, hey, we're waiting a minute just for other people to join. Over communicating those things are so great because you hop on a Zoom thing and it feels a little awkward when like nothing is happening.
This is such a good advice and so practical. The practical tip, like good manners of hosting an event. Welcome people, over communicate, and let people know if you're waiting. Let people know. And do you have any like what do you do if everybody who's joining is keeping their cameras turned off? Like, do you tell people to turn down?
It depends. Again, it varies a little bit like culture to culture. Small bets, it's people who a lot of times are hopping in, maybe while they're dropping their kids off, maybe they're doing something. A lot of people are introverted, maybe they're shy for whatever reason. And so there's no pressure within small bets to turn your cameras on. A lot of times, even like Daniel might even say, like, hey, a little bit of an introverted group here. It's okay if, people don't have their cameras on. At the same time, I've also been in communities, for example, like Rite of Passage is a writing cohort for a month, and it's very focused on not only interacting with the speaker, but also building a community and getting to know people like on the screen. It's very like high. It's a very like high energy group. So, those 5 weeks are really like go, go, go. And like, you like to see people and like sometimes there'll be music and people will be dancing at the beginning. And they always make an emphasis like this is a group where we have our cameras on. And so I think you should know what you want. Like, do you want people to have their cameras on? Do you not want people to have their cameras on? It might depend on the topic. For example, we just had Rick Lewis, who is a public speaker. He's spoken at Fortune 500 companies. He's done like thousands of speeches. He just did a class for small bets. And he emphasized like, hey, like I want to see people's faces. I want to see the camera on. You are here to learn to speak in public. That's a public activity, and it's gentle, it's kind. Sometimes people in the chat will be like, hey, like I'm in my car, I can't turn my camera on. Totally forgiving in that sense. But a lot of times if you just ask people, they will turn their camera on. But similar to that situation, when I joined that group and nobody had their camera on, nobody was saying hello. It was very strange. I didn't want to turn my camera on because I was like, I'm going to be the only person with my camera on. This is so weird. So I think it's nice when you can actually just like set the tone, like, hey, like turn your camera on. We'd love to see your faces. We'd love to see your smiling faces, And that I will say when people do have their cameras on, it can be a better experience for the speaker as well.
Makes a lot of sense. And it goes to say the power of just setting the culture in your community for the community because anybody new who comes in, doesn't matter how many Zoom meetings or how many workshops they've been to, people will do what they see other people doing around them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's 5,000 people in small bets. How many of those people joined this past month? They have no idea what the culture is. They don't know what's normal. They're going to do what other people do. And, it's funny. I have been reading The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. So she speaks a little bit about the theory behind hosting a party and hosting a gathering. But I think so many things that she talks about is so applicable to online classes as well, or facilitating online meetings, or even facilitating like a Discord. But something that she speaks about specifically is that a chill host is a bad host. And she says, like, a lot of people want to be a cool host. They don't want to be too formal. They don't want to like tell people what to do. And similarly to a Zoom call, I think a chill speaker, a chill host, you're not doing anybody a service. Like people want structure. They want to know like, what are the rules? How do people interact? Is it weird if I ask a question in the chat or is that normal? Like those type of things. It just tells people like, hey, this is what the culture is of this meeting right now. I'm letting you know up front, and people can then choose to participate. And I think you'll be surprised at how many people do end up participating.
Mhm. This reminds me and makes me feel so bad about all the times that I've been such a bad host when I was the person in charge of the
Same.
community.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm a chill people pleaser. I totally agree. Like, I think I'm super lucky. Like, I've had an opportunity to work with some of the best communities. Like, I really feel like that. And what you end up seeing is that the reason the experience is so good is because they're really thoughtful. They do try to have structure. They have a specific time they're working within. They want to make sure, things are moving. They want people to have their cameras off, or they want people to ask questions in the chat. And the more you communicate those things, the better it is. But I'm the same way. Like, I would totally just be a chill host, but what Priya Parker says, which is really funny, she's like, if you're a chill host, then what ends up happening, and you'll see this happen in sometimes like in classes or Zoom calls, where the most like loud or aggressive person will like take over. So you'll have somebody who all of a sudden is, they're asking a question and they're going on for 10 minutes, or they're like, let me also share my screen. And or
Mm.
they're setting the tone, right? Like whatever they do is what other people do. And so if you're a chill host, it's not like nobody's leading. It's like you're leaving space for someone else to lead.
Okay, so talking about things that I did wrong, I wanna rectify some of them. So you mentioned that you will have somebody who comes in and they just take over the floor and asks their question or shares about starts being about themselves for 10 minutes. I've had that
Mhm.
happen to me a couple of times, and I was I had no idea what to do in that scenario. I just let them continue for 10 minutes. And what would you do, and what do you do if that happens to you?
Yeah, I know it definitely happens to me. And actually, my background is in sales. So I was in software sales for 6 years. And so a lot of the things I learned about facilitating a meeting is also based off of having a little bit of experience facilitating meetings with, your tech suite, like your CTO and your engineers and all of these people in a room. And especially in sales, like people, they're not really that excited to talk to you. So you have to really like make sure you cover what you're going to cover in the time that you're going to cover it. And if somebody goes off and they're talking about something random, you're like, oh no, dude, like I don't have time. Like I need to get my message across. At the same time, like people are not professional speakers. People are not, a lot of people ramble naturally. Like I don't think it's like a bad intention necessarily. So what I typically do when I'm in those situations, one, this is why it's good to have a plan, because if I have an extra 2 minutes, I don't mind if someone goes on for a second sharing their thoughts. What I will do though is if they're sort of going on, I'll maybe wait for them to take a breath and say, hey, I love this question. Like, we'll make sure we have some time at the end to get to it. Or I'll be like, I'm going to answer the first part of your question. It's really great. And then I'm going to have to keep moving forward just because I want to get through the last portion of this. And then if you still have questions, feel free to ask them then. So I think what you can do
Mhm.
is sort of gently, or sorry, kindly, but aggressively interrupt them. It's okay to be like, hey, like, because what happens is you're being kind to that person, but you're not being kind to the other 30, 40, 50 people who are in the Zoom room. Like, you start to see people's eyes glaze over. They're like, this person has gone into a story. And so it's important to be able to guide that person to, you know, okay, we have your
Right.
question. I don't need the whole story behind it. And I typically, for me, I'm like, we can do it at this end, because if it's the end of the meeting, you can go on for 5 minutes and talk about whatever. That's just borrowed time. But I think it's important. Like, I totally get it. I think don't be afraid to be like, oh, if you have to, like, if they don't breathe, some people can. Me, for example, I can talk for 5 minutes without breathing. So I'm
Yeah.
sure I'm hard to interrupt. But at the same time, if somebody does kind of interrupt me, and what they're basically saying, right, is like, we need to move forward. I'm always happy to do that. I'm like, oh yeah, sorry,
Mhm.
I was asking
Yeah.
this question, and then I just got in my head about it, and just started rambling. So I think kindly but
Mhm.
aggressively telling people that
Such a
we
good
need.
tip. Such a good tip. I'm so glad that I'm already learning such practical things out of this interview. It's making me a better host. I feel, yeah, I hope I don't do this mistake when I run like a workshop again in the future.
Yeah, it's all learning and growing, right? Like you learn through doing. I'm sure the first time I had my first meeting and someone did that, I let them go on for a little bit, but after a while you test it a little bit. You're like, okay, what sounds polite? What sounds, still firm? And you know, you try it and you fail and you try and then eventually you figure out like a good cadence.
That makes a lot of sense. And talking about moderation, let's talk about the Discord part of your job, where you're basically monitoring the Discord. And uh, like, tell us, what do you do when you say you're monitoring the Discord and setting the culture with it? What does it involve?
Yeah, I'm really lucky that I started to join a community and moderate a community on Discord that was already so active and where Daniel had already set such a great tone for the Discord channel. I would say one, I technically I'm supposed to check it once a day. I check it probably quite a few times a day just because it's on my phone and, I'll think about it. I'm part of Small Bats. I'm part of the community. I was part of the community before I started working for them. So, I enjoy it. But I think, high level, I do want to make sure nothing crazy is going on, nothing inflammatory, like something just bad, which to be honest hasn't happened on my watch. So I'm really lucky because of that. Got to make sure Small Bot hasn't gone crazy. But I do keep an eye out for that and, have the ability to intervene if needed. But it's a pretty respectful community. So it's not something I have to worry about too much. We do have a small wins channel. So if people are posting their small wins, I do try to encourage them, at least throw up like an emoji or something, because I think you'd be surprised. People are shy to share their wins, like they're like, I don't want to, I don't want to, maybe this isn't big enough, or I don't want to make it seem like I'm bragging or like I'm promoting something. It's like, just share your win, this whole channel for it doesn't matter. So if people do share those things, I want to give them positive reinforcement. So that's something that I'm doing. Daniel and Louis did the same thing. They chime in, if there's something specific that people, Louis does the newsletter launchpad. So if someone has a big newsletter win, a lot of times Louis will chime in and say, hey, that's amazing, or will ask their own questions. So again, I think that if you can do that, that will really help your community because you're setting a tone, right? Like other people do that too. Other people, if you emoji something, other people will, follow the emoji. If you comment on it, they'll also comment and say, oh my gosh, I love this. I'm also interested in this. Can you share how you were able to grow your Substack to 10,000 followers? Like, what are some tips that you have? So it actually creates like a conversation. So with our Discord, I would say those are big things. Obviously, you want to do like high level moderation, make sure nothing crazy is going on. Some bot hasn't come and started saying all this inflammatory stuff. And I think also like encouraging people is a big thing too. And one thing I'll add too that I like that Daniel does is that the Discord is built to grow as people need it to. So what I mean by that is that if you have like a Discord or a Slack, you can set up like 100 channels. And I think what happens is that like people ask for channels a lot. So they'll be like, oh, I think we should have a channel for YouTube people specifically, or we should have a channel specifically for people growing on LinkedIn. And a lot of times what we say is like, hey, like start a thread. So in Discord, you can start like a thread conversation. And it's like, if that gets to a point where it's like pretty active, we can definitely add that as a channel. Because otherwise what happens, you end up having all of these channels and it's spread thin and people don't really know where to go for things, or like one people will comment, but nobody will ever respond. And so you want to sort of grow as you need. So I feel like you could have like one main channel. And if you see that a lot of people are talking about their small wins, you could be like, cool, let's make a small wins channel. Or a lot of people are talking about software development was one that we had recently. And that channel is very active. So I think that's another thing. Those are my pieces of advice. Moderate it, make sure that if anybody is not acting appropriately, you definitely want to handle it because that's just going to really bring down the tone of the whole group. You want to make sure that you're celebrating wings, you're encouraging people, you're setting a really positive tone. And also you want to make sure that you're growing to the size of your Discord channels, not the other way around. You don't want to like have 100 channels and just one person, every now and then dipping into things.
Yeah, this is something that I also advise to my clients whenever I work with them. But talking about people and moderating people, people acting poorly in Discord. So, I'm curious. You have a community which is made of entrepreneurs, or actually aspiring entrepreneurs. It's more. I will bet that most of them are, in the early stages of their entrepreneurship journey, and we know that a lot of them have a product to sell to other community members. So, do you have any guideline, or how do you handle cases where people become overzealous and start promoting their product too much, and it kind of kills the vibe? How do you deal with that scenario?
That's a good question because it is something that we do keep an eye out for. I will say, I think it's two parts. One, and I think this is true for any type of problem you have, message them privately. Like a lot of times people just don't realize, they think, oh, I posted this in one channel and maybe I should post it in 3 other channels. And if they do that every single week, you might be like, hey, like you're kind of like over, it's a little bit much. But I think if you kindly tell people like, hey, like, we notice it's a lot of like promotion or whatever it is, if you don't mind like scaling it back, most people are pretty open to that. I think most people are actually pretty like embarrassed, right? Like again, people don't know what the right amount is. So if you say something to somebody, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," and you can say like, "Hey, you can still encourage them, like, hey, no, you can totally still share this, but it's a little bit much if it's like every single day, or it's like kind of like flooding the channel." What I have noticed is that it's not too much of a problem actually. Like, yes, maybe you'll start to see somebody, maybe one person will post it in 3 different channels and you're like, is that like too much? But then they won't do it again. So I think it's also okay to like wait and see, because a lot of times like someone will just get excited about something they started and people are not too like, they're not really against it. But like if it does get a little bit too much self-promotion, you can always talk to people about that too. I think it also depends on your community. Small Bets is meant to encourage people to create and market their products. If somebody creates a small bet, that's like almost like an advertisement for small bets, right? Like, hey, this person joined this community, they just had a small bet. It encourages other people to get that thing launched as well. There might be communities where small like self-promotion doesn't make sense. Like I've been in communities where when you join, they're like, hey, you don't get to share links. You don't get to promote your podcast, or they'll do like self-promotion Wednesday or something. And so I think it also depends on like what the purpose of your community is. Like some communities, again, like Small Bets, like we want people to share as much as possible. We want you to self-promote. Like we want to encourage you on your wins, and people can learn from that and they can ask questions. So it's like part of the culture. We're not really against it at all. There are other communities that are like super, super strict. And I think you have to find that balance. There are some places where they like never talk about your product, never talk about anything that you're doing. And then that also makes it not really fun for the community members. So I think use your intuition, like if you see somebody posting a lot, if people are kind of like starting to like complain about it a little bit, you could be like, okay, maybe I should step in.
That's good. Yes, that makes a lot of sense, and it's pretty intuitive. So basically, go with your gut and be kind to people.
Exactly. Yeah. And I said, don't be afraid to say something, like I think that you're moderating the community for a reason. And again, like you don't want one person to ruin the experience of 5,000.
Okay, switching gears a little bit, you mentioned that you have worked with other communities also, like Rite of Passage and the Pathless Path. So, can you speak about things that you have taken from this community and brought to those communities, and also like what have you learned from those communities that you brought into this community?
Yeah, one of the really cool things about being able to freelance with different communities is I can see what they do well and take and adjust those for the communities that I'm in. So, for example, Small Bets has a really active Discord channel. And like I said, like I sort of learned from Daniel that supporting people, encouraging people to share, encouraging the promotion of their work is something that's not only needed, but really, really valued. So when I joined Rite of Passage, actually not even as someone who was working for Rite of Passage, what I did with Rite of Passage, because there was a big demand to have like a women's group from Rite of Passage, like with the women's alumni. So I started a WhatsApp channel with a couple of my friends. Again, this was something that was asked for. I was not necessarily, I held like meetings every so often, and people were like, it'd be really nice to have a channel. And I was like, fine, I'll do it. And it's really amazing. I probably said 10 different times, every time a bunch of people join, hey, feel free to share your drafts, feel free to share your Substacks, feel free to share your published posts. This is a place to share those things. Do not, like, we're totally great. We're totally excited to support you. Like, share. And I think that's just important to emphasize because, again, people are shy to do so. Maybe one person will always be fine sharing, but a lot of people are shy. So that was something I took from the Small Bets Discord that I use for our WhatsApp channel. And I chose WhatsApp because it's just one chat function. I was like, I don't want 100 different channels, because I've seen the opposite happen where people will be like, oh, I'm going to start this community and I'm going to have a Discord or a Slack or a Circle page with all of these different pages. And yes, it's nice because it's organized. But again, you have one person posting in feedback. You have one person posting in small wins. You have one person posting in general. And if your community isn't that big, it just feels like you're in a conference hall with 5 people for an intimate dinner, which is actually something Priya Parker also talks about in the Art of Gathering. She talks about how you want your, like, the physical space for your party to match the number of people that you have. So if you have a huge conference hall, but only 10 people are going to be kind of awkwardly spread out. They're not going to know where to be. There's no like intimacy built in. So I think with having like a little bit of like a tighter fit for the community, you get a little bit of that intimacy.
Mhm. That's some great advice. I need to read Priya Parker's book. I like almost every other guest that comes on this podcast, they're talking about this book, and
Really?
somehow I have not yet been able to get to it. I need to put it on my list now.
We talked about it on our podcast recently, my sister and I. So it sort of pushed me to get through it. But as soon as I read it, it doesn't sound that interesting, right? You're like, oh, it's party planning. Oh, excuse me, I'm like burping. It doesn't sound that interesting because you're like, oh, party planning, how interesting could that be? But I loved it. It's so helpful when you're thinking about facilitating in-person groups, but I found it super applicable to my online meeting facilitation as well.
Yeah, I need to. I'll do it like right away. You've inspired me now.
Yay!
Okay, one more question about the small bets versus the rite of passage experience. So one of these is like a very scrappy experience. The other one has a very creme de la creme feels to it. So can you contrast these vibes and talk a little bit about which one should a person choose? Like how should a person choose between the two vibes when they're starting a new community?
Yeah, it's really cool to be a part of both communities, especially since I think both approaches fit the themes of the communities really well. So Small Bets is all about getting started, making it happen, getting your minimal viable product going, and just like being scrappy. And I love the feel of the Discord for that reason, of the guest classes. It feels, again, very intimate, and also like you're with a bunch of people who are just like scrappy and putting it together and figuring it out as you go. And Small Bets really embodies that ethos and really also shows how you can be successful doing that as well. Rite of Passage, the difference between Rite of Passage is that it's a 5-week cohort-based course. So their next one is in April. And so it's condensed in time. It's not, going forever. And they are all about creating like a white glove experience. Like David Perel really emphasizes this when he's talking to his team. Like every detail should be thought about so that when you're going through this experience, it just feels seamless. And when I took it as a student, it felt like that. I was like, wow, everything runs so smoothly and you don't even think
For
about the
example,
little
what like
details.
can you
Uh,
paint a picture for me?
yeah, that's a really good point. So for example, like every meeting starts on time, ends on time, which is a little thing, but it's nice when there's like 25 classes in a week to know that I'm not going to be going overtime. And every person knows that. They emphasize that in the background. Even little things like I was hosting the watch parties. So they have live sessions for people who are international or don't make them. They'll replay the live sessions, and you could just have people join a Zoom and hit play, right? Like that could be that experience. But they actually hired me to make it so that when there are breakouts, when there are interactive pieces, instead of playing the video, we stop the video and I hop in and I chat. And it's a little thing, right? But in the background, me and my partner, Charlotte, we will be working with each other to make sure we're timing everything correctly. As soon as one video ends, I'm popping up there. And that's the expectation for the course as well. Like that's what they want us to do. That's what we practice it, we train for it. And it makes for a really great experience. And possibly as a student, you might think, oh, this worked out really well. It runs smoothly. But there's like, we have a WhatsApp channel. We're like making sure like, okay, this went a little bit over. Let me make sure I cut down what I'm saying in the background for the breakout. Maybe we'll adjust these timings. Those little details, even like the details of having your cursor on the screen or the play button showing. Like if we can hide those things just so it really feels like you're watching the live session, that's something that they don't have to care about, right? Like they can just give the recording to people. They don't even have to create a time for people to watch it. And I really appreciate like how much work we put just to make that experience good for the people who couldn't make the meeting. It's not even for the main session.
Right. This is fascinating. Having watch parties and focusing so much on making the watch party experience better for people. That's yeah. You did a good job painting a picture. I think I understand how wide love that community is. So the second part of the question, how should people decide whether to create the Scrappy community or the white love community?
My opinion is you should start off Scrappy. When David Perel started his course, my understanding is that first he tweeted, hey, I think I want to teach 1,000 people how to write online. And then I'm pretty sure it was just a Zoom meeting with him. Maybe he had other instructors. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure it looked very similar to a lot of the classes that you see that get launched. And I think that's the best thing to do because with the small bets mentality, test it out. Like, are people interested? Do people want to show up? Don't put all your time and energy and money and resources to create this white glove experience when you don't even know if people are interested or you don't even know the community culture. Maybe if, the first time they ran the sessions for Rite of Passage, maybe they found out that everybody is really quiet. They don't want to talk. They want to have their cameras off. They want to be able to write silently. They would have turned it into a different type of community because they're listening to what people want. And so I think actually both for David Perel, both for Daniel Vassallo, they take feedback and listen to what people are asking for and are able to pivot really quickly. Rite of Passage, for example, within a cohort will make a major change, like how long a session is or how much time you allocate for like a breakout room based on the feedback they receive, because they know that the people who are taking the course, their paid members, are the ones that are really experiencing it. And they want to make sure that they're responding in a way that can create a great experience.
Interesting. And can you tell me on the topic of creating a community and advice for people who want to start a community, why do you feel more big creators aren't starting communities today?
If I was to guess, it's a lot of work. It's not a lot of work, but
Yeah.
it's another job, right? Like it's another thing that you have to manage. And so it depends on what your goals are as a creator. However, I do think if you have a community, one, it's nice because you have direct access to the people who are engaging with your work. I have a podcast, and when we started our podcast, one of the most frustrating things is you have no idea who's listening to it. You have no idea what they like. And so a community gives people not only an opportunity to give you feedback, but also a chance to talk about the things that you're talking about and like get excited and nerd out with like-minded people. So I think that if you're willing to put a little bit of time and effort to start a community, it's totally worthwhile, but it's, it's another project you're taking on. So I do think it's something to not take lightly.
Hmm. Tell me on that topic, like, what's the setup for small bets, the tools that you're using on the back end?
Yeah, it's changed over time because now a lot of things are in-house. So Discord is where people are able to chat with one another. They're able to get feedback, share their wins, share things that are interesting. Something exciting happens on Twitter. A lot of times the Small Bets Discord will go off. There is just a Zoom, honestly, Zoom for recording the conversations with the guest classes, Zoom for, hosting the guest classes. Everything is done remotely. They use Notion to hold the recordings, Vimeo and Notion. So we upload the videos to Notion. I'm sorry, we upload the videos to Vimeo, and then I move them all to Notion. So you have like a little page with the chat transcript, the recording, slides, any kind of details that the speaker gives us. And then we just share those in the Discord channel. Now there's also a Small Bets website. Louis and Daniel are both engineers, so they wanted to own a little bit of their own real estate, make it accessible to people. So on their website, you can also find like the recordings, the guest classes. You can share a directory. It's a private page. You have to log in with your Small Bets email, but they have access for people who, those people who are like, Discord is so crazy. I don't want to learn it, but I still want to be a part of the community. They can also access things through the website.
I like this. There's very minimal setup. So just a Discord and a Zoom for the community experience, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Discord, Zoom, Notion, Vimeo.
Notion,
That's
yeah,
it. Mm-hmm.
nice. Like it's like the reason why it's simple is because it feels like these are tools that are accessible to everybody, whether you're just starting out or you already have a big audience or a community. So it's nice to know.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I should add Gumroad. Like if people sign up, I think right now they sign up through Gumroad. So if you need like
Got it.
a place, like a landing page for people to sign up, that's a good option as well. There are a lot of options out there for that type of thing though.
Love it. Okay, perfect. And one final question for you, Michelle. Tell us about the community that you are building and you're starting out.
Yeah. So something that I write a lot about because I left my job in software sales a couple of years ago, and then I went on a sabbatical for 2 years and moved into freelance. So I write a lot about that. I talk about it a lot on my podcast, Build a Wealthy Spirit. And unfortunately, in the industry that I was in, which is tech, there are a lot of layoffs, a lot of people losing their jobs right now. And also just thinking the same thing I was thinking when I lost my job, which is I'm burnt out. I'm feeling uninspired. I maybe want to do my own thing. I want to break. Like my head hurts. And so me and my co-partner, Toby, are going to be launching a course, which is around the idea of moving from a layoff to a sabbatical, specifically for people who are working in industries like tech, where you may have lost your job, you may have a little bit of like security and you maybe want to take a little bit of time off, but you're not sure how to do it. And you also want to meet other people who are in a similar situation. So we'll be hosting that in March. You can find information for everything for me, michelleelizabethvarghese.com. And I'm really excited about it because it's the type of thing, again, people tweet at me all the time about it. My piece, Sabbatical Mindset, is one that people email me about and feel very, I think, seen reading things like that. And so I'm excited to be able to just create a little bit of a community around essentially burned out tech workers.
Yeah, I can imagine so many people in my own, friend circle who would, benefit a lot from joining a community like this. I love that you're
Yeah.
starting out. Yeah, something for people who are being impacted by the layoffs.
Yeah. I'm excited. I think it's also, I went through something similar myself. So I just know it's like a stressful and sometimes like lonely experience. Unfortunately, one that's affecting a lot of people within, an industry that I love, tech. And so we're hoping to be able to help people figure out how to have a pause and also maybe make decisions that are more aligned with their values for whatever their next step is going to be.
Yeah, I love this. We're gonna link to the website in the show notes so that listeners, if you're listening, and you want to check it out, you can check out the show notes and visit the community. Join Michelle.
Thank you so much. It was such a joy to chat with you today.
It was a great pleasure chatting with you too, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Take care.